I wanted to expound a little bit about the differences between conservative families and liberal families, and um, I think it gets to the heart of the matter of what's wrong with conservatives and the ways in which they're blind to it and the ways in which they get trapped in it. Okay? So bear with me, especially if you're conservative. Just listen to the whole thing before you draw any conclusions. Conservatives tend to be very authoritarian. That is, they believe that the person who is the authority, knows the most, is the most mature, should be the one who controls a social organization. They strongly believe in leadership and a chain of command, that things tend to be very hierarchical. And, for any given person, they can always trace a chain of command up to the very top. And the very top, of course, is God. All right? So, God is the supreme authority. You have to obey God. And that all just trickles down, that obedience to God and obedience to leaders who are obedient to God and everything else, that all permeates throughout their social organizations, especially the family. Now, in places where conservative families flourish, they tend to be very sparsely populated. That is, the families are very easily isolated from other people, okay? And that is probably the only kind of environment where these families can do well, all right? Now, by outward appearances, when you look at these families that are very conservative, they seem to be very harmonious and very peaceful, and the children show a lot of respect towards the parents, and they're very obedient, and it looks as though it's just the ultimate expression of family coherence, that as a social organization, their families are very well integrated and very coherent, and they don't argue, they don't fight. It's because the children always obey, and the parents are always benevolent. Okay, and that's why it's very easy, I guess, for conservatives to point the finger at liberals, because liberals have a different parenting style altogether, and point at liberals and say, see, your kid's being disobedient and disrespectful and all this other stuff, and how do you tolerate that? Don't you have a spine? Or, why don't you take charge of your children and be responsible for their behavior? Well, that's what the claim is, okay? So, liberals are doing something decidedly more experimental. Okay, so a conservative will say, well, our methods are tested. They've passed the test of time, and we believe in them because we've done them for generations, and it's always worked, and it's passed the test of time. Whereas liberals, they're doing all this experimental stuff, and they're just making all kinds of mistakes. They're making mistakes on their children, and they're just horrible. Well, admittedly, with this paradigm shift, there are going to be mistakes. We don't have everything perfect yet, okay? But something that we as liberals have experienced is more of the outside world, okay? So we don't have the luxury of cutting our children off from outside influences because they're everywhere, all right? And our parenting style is adapting to that new environment. We have to adapt to an environment where our children are exposed to a lot of things that perhaps conservative families just aren't exposed to at all. They live in isolation. They've got miles of distance between their neighbors, and they can afford to have this very authoritarian structure because they don't have to worry about outside influences. Now, what liberals try to teach their children is to be independent, to treat people as peers, to think as a peer, to treat others as peers, and to be responsible for themselves. Okay? Now, they're going to make mistakes, okay? And parents are going to make mistakes, especially parents who are just fumbling around with this for the first time, because it is kind of new. But I think it's worthwhile, for one simple reason, and that is because ultimately there is no ultimate authority. And that's the problem. With authority, with the hierarchy of authority comes power. And with power comes corruption. And in a society, it's all too easy for corruption to occur when people are just simply obedient. So obedience is something that liberals do not want to teach their children to be. Okay? Not just arbitrarily obedient to authority. We don't believe in it. Fundamentally don't believe in it because we think it leads to corruption. And we're willing to take some hits along the way and say, yeah, we're going to make mistakes, and we're learning about this. We're learning about the best ways to teach our children, to raise our children. It's still experimental. We're still learning, but it's worthwhile doing. The reason being is because we don't believe that we should be teaching our children to be obedient to authority. Okay? That is why. Now, I know some of my authoritarian friends, the Christian friends especially, have this paradigm that their lives are very authoritarian. Their families are very secure and very harmonious and very happy. But, when their kids hit the real world, well, the real world is wicked. And the real world corrupts their children, okay? So they're on a crusade to try and fix the world of its wickedness, okay? But I have to tell you, the thing that causes corruption in society is obedience to authority. Okay? You're teaching your children to be obedient to authority. They are going out into the world empowering corrupt, powerful people. Okay? So, what you think is harmonious for family life is contributing to the chaos out in the real world. Alright? Because people only get powerful and corrupt when they can find followers who will obey them without question. Okay? So the liberals do not believe in authoritarian social structures at all. We believe in peer networks, egalitarian values, and that people should empower themselves, and that is the way in which we keep corruption from occurring. Okay? So what the conservatives fail to see is the loop. They create obedient children who create corruption in the world. And they blame the outside world. They say it's your fault for being corrupt. But they're not doing anything to correct it. They are powerless to correct it. All they can do is complain. They can just complain that the world is a corrupt place and look what you did to my obedient children. Okay? It's your obedient children that contributed to this problem. And if you taught your children not to be obedient, then it would go far towards stemming the tide of corruption. So, anyways, that was probably a long rant. I hope you enjoyed it. So, look forward to your comments. That's all for now. Thanks. Bye.